Sarah Martinez had always known she wanted to fly. As a little girl growing up in Texas, she would lie on her back in the dusty backyard, watching military helicopters practice maneuvers overhead. While other children saw noisy machines, Sarah saw freedom, purpose, and her future calling. Her father, a mechanic at the local airport, would sometimes take her to work on weekends. She would spend hours watching pilots prepare for flights, asking endless questions about controls, weather patterns, and navigation systems. When Sarah turned 18, the military had just begun accepting more women into aviation programs. The timing seemed perfect, but the reality proved much harder than she had imagined. The recruitment office was filled with young men, all looking confident and eager. When Sarah walked in wearing her best dress and carrying a folder of her high school achievements, the recruiting sergeant barely looked up from his paperwork. "You here for your boyfriend, miss?" he asked without making eye contact. "No, sir, I'm here for myself. I want to be a helicopter pilot," Sarah replied. Her voice steady despite her racing heart. The sergeant finally looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion, then to barely concealed amusement. He glanced around the room at the other recruiters who had stopped their conversations to listen. A few quiet chuckles echoed through the space. "Well, that's interesting," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You know, this isn't like flying a car, right? These machines weigh thousands of pounds. The training is intense, physically demanding. Most men struggle with it." Sarah had expected this reaction. She had practiced her response many times in the mirror at home. "Sir, I understand the challenges. I've been studying flight mechanics for 2 years. I can lift my own body weight, and I scored in the top 5% on the military aptitude test." The sergeant's expression remained skeptical, but he couldn't argue with test scores. After making Sarah wait for 30 minutes longer than necessary, he finally handed her the application forms. "Fill these out," he said. "But don't get your hopes up. The washout rate is high, especially for—" He paused, searching for the right words. "People like you." Sarah knew exactly what he meant, but she smiled politely and took the forms. Over the next 3 hours, she filled out every line carefully, double-checking her answers. When she returned the completed paperwork, the sergeant seemed surprised she was still there. The next few months involved multiple interviews, physical tests, and psychological evaluations. At each step, Sarah encountered the same pattern. Officials would express surprise at her presence, make subtle comments about the difficulty of the program, and suggest she might be happier in administrative roles or nursing. Each time, Sarah responded with facts about her, qualifications, and unwavering determination. The physical fitness test proved particularly challenging, not because Sarah wasn't strong enough, but because the male candidates seemed determined to make her feel unwelcome. During the running portion, several deliberately boxed her in, forcing her to fall behind the pace. During strength training, they would occupy equipment longer than necessary when it was her turn. The testing supervisors noticed, but said nothing, treating it as part of the normal competitive atmosphere. Sarah adapted quickly. She arrived earlier than everyone else to claim equipment first. She found alternative routes during runs to avoid the clusters of hostile candidates. Most importantly, she never complained or asked for special treatment. She understood that any sign of weakness would be used as evidence that women didn't belong in the program. The written examinations covered aerodynamics, weather systems, navigation, emergency procedures, and military protocol. Sarah had spent months preparing, reading every manual she could find and seeking advice from experienced pilots at her father's airport. When the results were posted, her name appeared in the top 10%. Several male candidates who had been particularly dismissive scored significantly lower during the interview phase. Sarah faced a panel of 5 officers, all men, all with decades of military experience. Their questions started professionally but gradually became more personal and pointed. "How do you plan to handle the stress of combat situations while managing female emotional responses?" one colonel asked. "The same way male pilots handle stress while managing male emotional responses, sir," Sarah replied calmly. "Through training, preparation, and focus on the mission." Another officer leaned forward. What happens if you're assigned to a unit where the men don't want to work with you? How will you handle that situation? Sarah had thought about this question many times. Sir, I believe respect is earned through competence and reliability. I plan to prove myself through my actions, not my words. If someone has concerns about my abilities, I welcome the opportunity to demonstrate my skills. The questions continued for 2 hours, covering everything from her family background to her long-term career goals. Near the end, the youngest officer on the panel asked a more direct question. Miss Martinez, why is this so important to you? There are many other careers available to women now. Why choose something so difficult? Sarah took a moment to consider her answer. Sir, I believe everyone should have the opportunity to pursue their calling, regardless of gender. I'm not here to prove a point about women in general. I'm here because I believe I can be an excellent pilot and our military needs excellent pilots. If my success helps open doors for other qualified women in the future, that's a positive outcome. But it's not my primary motivation. The panel exchanged glances, and she could see a mix of reactions across their faces. Some seemed impressed by her composure, others remained skeptical, and a few appeared genuinely thoughtful about her responses. 2 weeks later, the acceptance letter arrived. Sarah had made it into the preliminary training program. The letter included a note at the bottom that seemed both encouraging and warning. Acceptance into preliminary training does not guarantee advancement to flight training. Candidates must maintain exceptional standards in all areas of performance. Sarah understood the subtext clearly. She would be held to higher standards than her male counterparts. Every mistake would be magnified. Every success would be minimized or attributed to luck. The real test was just beginning, but for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel genuinely excited about the future. That evening, she called her father to share the news. His pride was evident in his voice, but she could also hear his concern. Mia, he said, you know it's going to be harder for you than for the others. I know. Dad, she replied, looking out her window at the darkening sky where a helicopter's lights blinked in the distance. But I'm ready. The helicopter training facility stretched across hundreds of acres of Texas desert, with runways, hangars, and practice areas scattered throughout the landscape. Sarah arrived on a Monday morning in January, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing the regulation flight suit that still felt foreign against her skin. The other 23 candidates in her class had already formed small groups. Sharing stories about their backgrounds and expectations, Sarah approached the nearest group, hoping to introduce herself, but the conversation stopped when she walked up. An uncomfortable silence followed before one of the men, a tall blonde from Georgia named Rick, forced a smile. Hey there, he said. You must be our diversity hire. The comment stung, but Sarah kept her expression neutral. I'm Sarah Martinez. I'm here to learn to fly helicopters, same as everyone else. Right, Rick replied, his tone suggesting he didn't quite believe it. Well, good luck with that. The first instructor they met was Captain Williams, a veteran pilot with 15 years of experience and a reputation for being tough but fair. He gathered the class in a semicircle outside the main hangar, his weathered face serious as he looked each candidate up and down. Welcome to helicopter flight training, he began. Over the next 6 months, you will learn to operate some of the most complex machines in our military arsenal. Helicopters are not forgiving. They require constant attention, split-second decisions, and absolute precision. Approximately 60% of you will not complete this program. His eyes stopped on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. She couldn't tell if he was being encouraging or warning her specifically. You will be evaluated on technical knowledge, flight performance, emergency response, and teamwork. All areas must meet military standards. There are no participation trophies here. You either demonstrate competence or you wash out. Questions? Nobody raised their hand. Captain Williams nodded and led them into the hangar where 6 helicopters sat in perfect rows, their metallic surfaces gleaming under the bright lights. The first month focused entirely on ground school. They studied engine systems, rotor dynamics, weather interpretation, navigation, radio procedures, and emergency protocols. Sarah threw herself into the material, often staying in the classroom until security kicked her out at night. Her notes were more detailed than anyone else's, and she asked thoughtful questions that sometimes caught the instructors off guard. During study groups, Sarah initially tried to participate, but her contributions were often dismissed or ignored. When she corrected someone's mistake about rotor blade angles, Rick rolled his eyes and said, "Thanks, Professor." When she offered to help a struggling classmate with navigation calculations, he declined, saying he'd rather figure it out himself. Sarah learned to study alone. She found an empty classroom where she could review materials without the hostile atmosphere of the group sessions. Sometimes other candidates would walk by and peer through the window, making comments she couldn't quite hear but could easily imagine. The physical training component proved equally challenging, not because of the demands but because of the isolation. During morning runs, Sarah found herself running alone as the groups of men naturally formed ahead of her. During strength training, equipment would mysteriously become unavailable when it was her turn, or weights would be left in configurations that took extra time to adjust. The most difficult part was the subtle sabotage that was impossible to prove. Study materials would disappear from her desk. Her flight suit would be moved from her assigned locker. Important announcements would somehow not reach her, leaving her confused about schedule changes or requirements. Captain Williams seemed to notice some of these issues but never addressed them directly. Instead, he began checking in with Sarah individually, asking about her progress and understanding of the material. During these conversations, Sarah never complained about her treatment, instead focusing on technical questions and her development as a pilot. "Martinez," he said after one particularly challenging exam on emergency procedures, "you scored highest in the class again. How are you finding the social dynamics of the training environment?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, I'm here to learn to fly helicopters. I'm focused on that goal and not distracted by other considerations." Captain Williams nodded slowly. "Good attitude. Keep that focus. You'll need it." As the weeks progressed, Sarah began to notice differences in how she and her classmates were treated by various instructors. During technical discussions, her questions were often redirected or dismissed, while identical questions from male candidates received detailed explanations. During practical exercises, her mistakes were highlighted more prominently, while her successes were acknowledged briefly or attributed to luck. One afternoon during a complex navigation exercise, Sarah completed her calculations faster and more accurately than anyone else in the class. The instructor, Lieutenant Morrison, checked her work twice before announcing the results. "Martinez got the right answer," he said to the class. "Lucky guess, but correct nonetheless?" Rick raised his hand. "Sir, how do we know it wasn't just luck? Shouldn't we make sure she can repeat the process?" Lieutenant Morrison considered this. "Good point. Martinez, work through the problem again, step by step, so the class can follow your method." Sarah had to demonstrate her calculation process in detail while her classmates watched for errors. No one else was asked to repeat their work or explain their methods, even those who had gotten the wrong answers. Despite these challenges, Sarah's technical knowledge continued to excel. She consistently scored in the top 3 on written exams and demonstrated thorough understanding during oral questioning. Her physical fitness improved steadily, and she met all the strength and endurance requirements with room to spare. The real test came during the first simulator exercises. The helicopter simulator was a complex machine that replicated all the controls and responses of an actual aircraft. Students practiced basic maneuvers, emergency procedures, and navigation in a safe environment before moving to real helicopters. Sarah's first simulator session was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. When she arrived at the designated time, she found the simulator occupied and her instructor nowhere to be seen. After waiting 30 minutes, she found Lieutenant Morrison in the break room. "Sir, I believe I was scheduled for simulator time at 1400 hours, she said. Lieutenant Morrison looked at his clipboard. "Oh, right. We had to make some adjustments to the schedule. Technical problems with the simulator. You'll have to reschedule." Sarah glanced through the window at the simulator, where she could clearly see another student practicing hover maneuvers. Sir, the simulator appears to be functioning normally. Candidate Johnson is currently using it? Johnson had priority scheduling due to makeup time from a previous absence. Morrison replied without looking up from his paperwork. Sarah knew this was false. Johnson had perfect attendance and no missed sessions, but arguing would only create more problems. When can I reschedule, sir? I'll let you know when something opens up. 3 days later, Sarah finally got her simulator time. By then, other students had completed multiple sessions and were already discussing advanced maneuvers. Sarah had to catch up quickly, using her theoretical knowledge to compensate for the lost practice time. During her session, Captain Williams observed from the control room. Sarah worked through the standard exercises methodically, demonstrating smooth control inputs and proper procedures. When she completed the sequence, Williams called her into the observation room. Martinez, that was solid work. Your control inputs were precise and you maintained proper scan patterns throughout the exercise. How did you feel about the session? Sir, I felt comfortable with the controls. The theoretical knowledge translated well to the practical application. I'd like more practice with auto-rotation procedures and confined area landings. Williams made notes on his clipboard. Good self-assessment. You'll get plenty of practice with both. Your next session is Thursday at 100 hours. Sarah nodded and turned to leave, but Williams stopped her. Martinez, one more thing. I've been monitoring your progress closely. Your technical knowledge is excellent and your simulator performance is above average. When we move to actual aircraft next month, maintain that same focus and precision. The real helicopter is less forgiving than the simulator, but also more rewarding. You'll do fine. It was the first time any instructor had given her direct encouragement. Sarah felt a surge of confidence as she walked back to her quarters, ready to prove that their faith in her abilities was justified. 6 months after beginning training, Sarah stood in formation with 8 other graduates, wearing the wings that marked her as a qualified helicopter pilot. The graduation ceremony was brief but meaningful, with families gathered to watch their loved ones receive their certifications. Sarah's parents had driven 12 hours from Texas, and her father's pride was evident as he watched her receive her wings from Captain Williams. Congratulations, Lieutenant Martinez, Williams said as he pinned the wings to her uniform. You've earned these. Use them well. Sarah's assignment came the following week. 2nd Aviation Battalion, stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The unit specialized in transport and medical evacuation missions, operating a mix of older UH-60 Black Hawks and newer UH-72 Lakota helicopters. It was considered a challenging assignment with frequent deployments and demanding operational schedules. When Sarah arrived at Fort Campbell, the first person she met was Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the unit's senior enlisted advisor. Unlike many of the instructors she'd encountered during training, Rodriguez treated her with professional respect from the beginning. Lieutenant Martinez, welcome to the 2nd Battalion, he said, shaking her hand firmly. I've reviewed your training records. Impressive academic performance and solid flight evaluations. How are you feeling about your first operational assignment? I'm ready to contribute to the mission, Sergeant. I understand the unit has a strong reputation for excellence. Rodriguez nodded. We do, and we maintain that reputation by focusing on competence and teamwork. You'll be assigned to Alpha Company, working primarily with the medical evacuation teams. It's demanding work that requires precision flying and the ability to make quick decisions under pressure. He led her through the hangar where mechanics worked on various helicopters in different stages of maintenance. The smell of fuel and hydraulic fluid mixed with the sound of engines and power tools. Sarah felt at home immediately. Your company commander is Captain Thompson, Rodriguez continued. He's a good officer, but he's old school. Some of the pilots in the unit are adjusting to having women in operational roles. Give them time to see what you can do, and they'll come around. Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's honesty. I understand, Sergeant. I'm here to do my job well and support the mission. Her first meeting with Captain Thompson confirmed Rodriguez's assessment. Thompson was in his late 30s, with the confident bearing of someone who had spent years in command positions. He looked up from his desk when Sarah entered his office, his expression neutral but assessing. "Lieutenant Martinez, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I've reviewed your file. Strong training performance? No disciplinary issues? High marks from your instructors? That's good." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'll be honest with you, Lieutenant. This is the first time I've had a female pilot assigned to my company. I don't have any problems with it personally, but some of my men might need time to adjust. My advice is to prove yourself through your actions, not your words." Sarah had heard variations of this speech many times. "Yes, sir. I'm committed to meeting all operational standards and supporting the company. Mission? Good. You'll be paired initially with Chief Warrant Officer Davis. He's one of our most experienced pilots with over 3,000 flight hours. He'll evaluate your capabilities and recommend when you're ready for independent operations." Thompson stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "One more thing, Martinez. I run this company based on performance, not politics. Meet our standards and you'll do fine. Fall short and you'll be reassigned regardless of any external considerations. Clear?" "Crystal clear, sir." Chief Warrant Officer Davis turned out to be a quiet professional in his mid-40s who had served multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Unlike some of the younger pilots, he seemed genuinely interested in Sarah's development rather than proving any points about gender integration. "Martinez, I hear you had strong simulator scores during training," he said during their first pre-flight briefing. "That's good, but real-world flying is different. Simulators don't replicate weather, mechanical problems, or the stress of actual missions. My job is to make sure you're ready for all of that." Their first flight together was a routine training mission practicing approaches to various landing zones around the base. Davis demonstrated the preferred techniques for each location, explaining the specific challenges and hazards. Sarah flew the second half of the mission, with Davis providing guidance and corrections. "Your basic flying skills are solid," he told her during the post-flight debriefing. "Good control touch, smooth on the instruments, proper scan patterns. You need work on situational awareness and decision-making under pressure, but that comes with experience." Over the following weeks, Sarah flew increasingly complex missions with Davis. They practiced medical evacuations, cargo transport, and navigation in poor weather conditions. Davis was demanding but fair, pushing Sarah to improve while recognizing her strengths. The other pilots in the company were slower to accept her. During mission briefings, they would often discuss techniques and procedures among themselves, excluding Sarah from the conversation. In the pilot's lounge, conversations would stop when she entered, resuming only after she left. Nobody was openly hostile, but the message was clear. She was not yet considered part of the group. The breakthrough came during a night training exercise, designed to simulate a combat medical evacuation. Sarah was paired with Lieutenant Anderson, a pilot with 2 years of operational experience who had been particularly distant since her arrival. The scenario required them to navigate to a remote landing zone in total darkness, pick up simulated casualties, and return to base while dealing with various emergency situations introduced by the instructors. Anderson flew the initial leg to the landing zone, demonstrating confidence and skill in the challenging conditions. When they landed to pick up the casualties, the instructors introduced the first complication, simulated engine failure during takeoff. "Your aircraft, Martinez," Anderson said, transferring control to Sarah. According to standard procedures, Sarah immediately began the auto-rotation emergency procedure, lowering collective pitch and adjusting the aircraft's attitude to maintain rotor speed without engine power. She had practiced this scenario dozens of times in training, but executing it at night over unfamiliar terrain with simulated patients on board added significant pressure. The helicopter descended rapidly toward the ground as Sarah managed the controls, balancing airspeed and rotor RPM while searching for a suitable landing area. At the critical moment, she pulled collective pitch to cushion the landing, bringing the aircraft down hard, but within acceptable parameters. "Nice work," Anderson said, his tone carrying surprise and respect. "Clean autorotation. Good job maintaining rotor speed throughout the descent." The exercise continued with additional complications, including simulated hydraulic failures and radio problems. Sarah handled each emergency competently, communicating effectively with Anderson and making sound decisions under pressure. By the time they completed the training mission, Anderson's attitude had noticeably shifted. "Martinez," he said during their post-flight discussion, "that was solid flying. Your emergency procedures are better than half the pilots in this company. Where did you learn to handle autorotations that smoothly?" "Extra practice during training, sir. I spent a lot of time in the simulator working on emergency procedures." Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "It shows. Listen, some of us have been cautious about the changes happening in the unit. Nothing personal, just uncertainty about new situations. But flying skills don't lie. You've got them." Word of Sarah's performance during the night exercise spread quickly through the company. While she wasn't suddenly embraced by everyone, the level of professional respect increased noticeably. Pilots began including her in technical discussions, asking for her input on flight planning and procedures. The real test came 2 months later when the company received orders for a deployment to Afghanistan. Sarah would be flying actual combat missions where the stakes were real and the stakes could be fatal. Captain Thompson called her into his office the day before departure. "Martinez, you've shown steady improvement since arriving here. Davis speaks highly of your abilities and your performance scores are consistently above average. This deployment will be different from anything you've experienced. Are you ready?" Sarah had been preparing for this moment since the day she first decided to become a military pilot. "Yes, sir. I'm ready to serve wherever the mission requires." Thompson studied her for a moment. "I believe you are. Remember what I told you when you first arrived? Performance is what matters. Over there, your fellow pilots' lives may depend on your decisions. That's a responsibility I don't take lightly, and neither should you." "I understand, sir. I won't let the company down." As Sarah packed her equipment for deployment, she reflected on her journey from the skeptical recruitment office to preparing for combat operations. She had proven herself capable of meeting every standard and challenge presented to her, but she knew that the real test was still ahead. In Afghanistan, there would be no second chances and no allowances for anything other than excellence. The forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan sat like a small city in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains and endless stretches of desert. Sarah had been deployed for 3 months, flying medical evacuation missions throughout the region. The work was intense and demanding, with crews often flying multiple missions per day in challenging weather and hostile territory. Sarah had quickly proven herself valuable to the unit. Her precise flying skills and calm decision-making under pressure made her a preferred pilot for complex missions. The skepticism she had faced back at Fort Campbell had largely evaporated, replaced by professional respect and acceptance from most of her fellow pilots. The mission that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning in September. Intelligence reports indicated that a small outpost near the Pakistan border had taken casualties during an overnight firefight. The wounded soldiers needed immediate evacuation to the main hospital at Bagram Air Base, a flight that would require crossing some of the most dangerous terrain in Afghanistan. Major Harrison, the battalion commander, decided to personally oversee this mission due to its high-risk nature. Harrison was a decorated veteran with over 20 years of experience, known throughout the unit for his tactical expertise and steady leadership under pressure. At 45, he was considered one of the most capable helicopter commanders in the theater. "Martinez, you'll be my co-pilot for this one," Harrison announced during the mission briefing. "The landing zone is small and surrounded by high terrain. Weather reports show possible thunderstorms developing this afternoon, so we need to complete the mission quickly and efficiently." Sarah felt a surge of pride at being selected by Harrison himself. Despite her proven competence, This was the first time she had been chosen as co-pilot for such a high-profile mission led by the battalion commander. The briefing continued with detailed route planning, emergency procedures, and communication protocols. The outpost was located in a valley accessible only through a narrow mountain pass, with enemy activity reported in the surrounding area. 2 additional helicopters would escort their medical evacuation aircraft, providing security and backup support if needed. Weather is marginal but acceptable for departure, the meteorology officer reported. Visibility is currently 10 miles with scattered clouds at 4,000 feet. Temperature is 92 degrees with light winds from the southwest. There's a 30% chance of thunderstorms developing after 1,500 hours. Harrison studied the weather charts carefully. We'll need to complete the mission before the storms develop. If weather deteriorates while we're on the ground, we may have to delay departure until conditions improve. After the briefing, Harrison pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. Martinez, I want you to know I specifically requested you for this mission. Your performance over the past 3 months has been excellent, and I trust your judgment in difficult situations. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the confidence. This won't be a routine flight, Harrison continued. The terrain is challenging, the security situation is uncertain, and weather could become a factor. I need a co-pilot who can think independently and react quickly if situations change. Based on what I've observed, you're that person. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. I won't let you down. Sir, the pre-flight inspection revealed no mechanical issues with their UH-60 Black Hawk. Sarah methodically checked every system while Harrison coordinated with the escort, helicopters, and ground controllers. The aircraft was configured for medical transport, with stretchers and advanced life support equipment installed in the cargo area. As they prepared for departure, Sarah noticed that Harrison seemed slightly off his normal routine. Usually precise and methodical in his pre-flight preparations, he appeared to be moving more slowly and occasionally paused as if confused about the next step in his checklist. Sir, are you feeling all right? Sarah asked quietly. Harrison looked up from his instruments, seeming momentarily disoriented before focusing on her question. Yes, I'm fine. Just thinking through the mission parameters. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced but didn't press the issue. Harrison was known for his thoroughness, and she attributed his behavior to the stress of commanding such an important mission. They lifted off at 1300 hours, with the 2 escort helicopters taking positions on either side of their aircraft. The flight to the outpost would take approximately 45 minutes, following a circuitous route designed to avoid known enemy positions and areas of heavy ground fire. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded normally. Harrison handled the radios while Sarah flew the aircraft, navigating through the mountain passes with careful attention to terrain clearance and obstacle avoidance. The escort helicopters maintained proper formation, and communication with ground controllers remained clear and professional. As they approached the final mountain pass before reaching the outpost, Harrison's behavior became more concerning. He had been quiet for the past 10 minutes, responding slowly to radio calls and occasionally asking Sarah to repeat information she had already provided. His usual confident demeanor seemed replaced by confusion and uncertainty. Sir, how are you feeling? Sarah asked again, this time with more urgency in her voice. Harrison turned toward her, and she could see that his face was pale and covered with perspiration despite the air conditioning in the cockpit. I think I'm having some trouble concentrating. Might be the altitude. Sarah knew this wasn't an altitude problem. They were flying at only 6,000 feet, well within normal parameters for helicopter operations. Something was seriously wrong with Harrison, but they were in the middle of a critical mission with wounded soldiers waiting for evacuation. Sir, do you want me to take the controls and handle the radios? She offered. No, I'm fine, Harrison insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. He reached for the radio to contact the outpost, but his hand was shaking visibly. Sarah made a quick decision to alert the escort helicopters about the developing situation. Using their secondary radio frequency, she contacted the lead escort pilot. Ghost 2-1, this is Dustoff 7-6. Request you monitor our primary frequency closely. We may have a situation developing. Copy Dustoff 7-6. Standing by on primary. As they began their descent toward the outpost, Harrison's condition deteriorated rapidly. He was now sweating profusely and seemed to be having difficulty focusing on the instrument panel. His breathing had become shallow and rapid, and his responses to routine radio calls were delayed and sometimes inappropriate. Tower, this is ... Yeah. Who are we? Harrison said into the radio, his voice confused and weak. Sarah immediately took action, switching the radios to her control and responding to the ground controller. Tower, this is Dustoff 7-6. We are 5 minutes out from your location with medical crew standing by. She glanced at Harrison, who was now slumped forward in his seat, his eyes unfocused and his breathing irregular. The situation had escalated from concerning to critical in a matter of minutes. Sir, I need you to stay with me, Sarah said firmly while maintaining control of the aircraft. We're almost at the landing zone. Harrison tried to respond but only managed weak, incoherent mumbling. Sarah realized she was now effectively flying the mission alone, with an incapacitated commander and the lives of wounded soldiers depending on her ability to complete the evacuation successfully. The landing zone at the outpost was exactly as briefed, small, confined, and surrounded by high terrain with minimal room for error. Under normal circumstances, this would be a challenging landing requiring close coordination between pilot and co-pilot. With Harrison unconscious and unable to assist, it would test every skill Sarah had developed during her training and operational experience. The escort helicopters had noticed something was wrong and were requesting status updates, but Sarah couldn't take time to explain the situation fully. She had to focus entirely on bringing their aircraft safely to the ground while preparing for the possibility that Harrison's condition might continue to deteriorate, or that he might completely lose consciousness during the critical final approach phase of the mission. Sarah keyed the radio to contact the ground team at the outpost. Outpost 7-2, this is Dustoff 7-6 on final approach. We have medical crew standing by for immediate patient transfer. Dustoff 7-6, Outpost 7-2. Landing zone is secure, wind is light and variable. We have 2 urgent casualties ready for immediate transport. As Sarah began the final approach, she noticed Harrison's condition had worsened significantly. His head had fallen forward against his chest, and he was no longer responding to her attempts to get his attention. She could see his chest rising and falling, indicating he was still breathing. But he was completely unconscious. Sarah was now flying the helicopter entirely alone, managing all communications, navigation, and flight controls while approaching one of the most challenging landing zones in the region. The landing area was carved out of the mountainside, barely large enough for their helicopter, with rocky walls rising steeply on 3 sides and a drop-off on the 4th side that fell away into a deep valley. Ghost 2-1. This is Dustoff 7-6, Sarah transmitted to the escort helicopter leader. I have a medical emergency with my aircraft commander. He's unconscious. I'm continuing the approach solo. There was a pause before the escort pilot responded. Dustoff 7-6, do you require assistance? We can take over the mission if needed. Sarah considered the option for a moment. The escort helicopters weren't configured for medical transport, and transferring the mission would delay the evacuation of the wounded soldiers by at least an hour. The casualties might not survive that delay. Negative, Ghost 2-1. I'm continuing the mission. Request you monitor closely and be prepared to assist if needed. Copy, Dustoff 7-6. We have you covered. Sarah focused entirely on the approach, using every technique she had learned during training and operational experience. She had to compensate for the lack of a co-pilot by constantly switching her attention between flight controls, instruments, and visual references outside the aircraft. Normally, Harrison would be calling out airspeed, altitude, and distance to the landing zone. But now she had to monitor everything herself. The helicopter descended through the narrow mountain pass, with rocky walls passing close on either side. Sarah maintained precise control of airspeed and altitude, knowing that any mistake could result in striking the terrain or losing control of the aircraft. The confined space meant there was no room for error, and limited options for emergency escape if something went wrong. At 200 feet above the landing zone, Sarah began the final descent. The ground team had marked the landing area with colored smoke to indicate wind direction, and she could see the medical personnel waiting with stretchers. The wounded soldiers were lying nearby, ready for immediate loading onto the helicopter. As Sarah brought the helicopter lower, she felt the aircraft begin to settle into its own rotor wash, a phenomenon called settling with power that could cause rapid loss of altitude if not handled properly. She immediately adjusted the collective pitch and cyclic controls to maintain a stable descent, drawing on skills she had practiced hundreds of times, but never under such pressure. At 50 feet above the ground, Harrison suddenly jerked awake, looking around in confusion. "What's happening? Where are we?" he said, his voice weak and disoriented. "Sir, we're landing at the outpost. You lost consciousness during the approach. I need you to stay calm and let me finish the landing." Harrison tried to grab the flight controls, but his movements were unsteady and potentially dangerous. Sarah had to gently but firmly move his hands away from the controls while maintaining her focus on the landing. "Sir, please don't touch the controls. I have the aircraft. You're not well enough to fly right now." Harrison seemed to understand and slumped back in his seat, though he continued to look around in confusion. Sarah could see that whatever had affected him was still impacting his cognitive abilities. Sarah brought the helicopter to a smooth touchdown in the center of the small landing zone, with less than 10 feet of clearance on all sides. The moment the wheels touched the ground, the medical team sprang into action, rushing toward the aircraft with the wounded soldiers on stretchers. "Dustoff 7-6. This is ground team leader," came a voice over the radio. "Outstanding approach and landing. We have 2 urgent casualties loading now. Estimated loading time is 3 minutes. Sarah kept the engines running and the rotors turning while the medical team loaded the patients. She monitored Harrison, who was conscious but clearly not capable of flying. His color had improved slightly, but he was still confused and had difficulty focusing on simple questions. The loading process was completed quickly and efficiently. The crew chief gave Sarah a thumbs-up signal, indicating that all personnel were secure and ready for departure. Now came the most challenging part of the mission, taking off from the confined area and climbing out through the mountain pass with an incapacitated co-pilot. "Outpost 7-2, this is Dustoff 7-6. Patients loaded, ready for departure. Dustoff 7-6 cleared for departure. Safe flight." Sarah increased power and lifted the helicopter off the ground, immediately beginning a climbing turn to clear the surrounding terrain. The takeoff from a confined area required precise control inputs and careful attention to power management. As the thin mountain air reduced engine performance and rotor efficiency. As they climbed through 1,000 feet, Harrison suddenly became alert again. "Martinez, what happened? Why am I not flying?" "Sir, you lost consciousness during the approach. I completed the landing and we've loaded the patients. We're en route to Bagram now." Harrison looked at the instrument panel, clearly trying to process the information. "I don't remember. The last thing I remember was starting the approach to the outpost." "Sir, you had some kind of medical episode? Your condition deteriorated rapidly and you became unconscious. I took control of the aircraft and completed the mission." Harrison was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling to understand what had happened. Finally, he turned to Sarah with a serious expression. "Martinez, did you just complete a landing and take off from Outpost 7-2 entirely by yourself?" "Yes, sir. The mission required completion and the patients needed immediate evacuation." Harrison stared at her for a moment, then looked out at the mountainous terrain they were crossing. "That's one of the most challenging landing zones in the theater. Most pilots need a co-pilot to safely execute that approach. I had good training, sir, and the skills you and the other experienced pilots taught me." As they continued toward Bagram Air Base, Harrison's condition gradually stabilized, though he remained weak and occasionally confused. Sarah maintained control of the aircraft and handled all communications with air traffic control and the receiving medical facility. The escort helicopters had remained in formation throughout the mission, and the lead pilot contacted Sarah as they approached Bagram. Dustoff 7-6, this is Ghost 2-1. Outstanding job today. That was some of the finest single-pilot flying I've ever witnessed. Your patients are going to make it because of your skills. Thank you, Ghost 2-1. Just doing my job. But Sarah knew it had been much more than just doing her job. She had faced the ultimate test of her abilities as a pilot and proven that all the training, preparation, and determination had been worthwhile. More importantly, 2 wounded soldiers were alive because she had been able to complete a mission that would have challenged even the most experienced pilots under normal circumstances. As they landed at Bagram Air Base, Harrison turned to her with respect and gratitude clearly visible in his expression. Martinez, I don't know what happened to me today, but I know that without your skill and composure, this mission would have failed. You saved those soldiers' lives and probably mine as well. That was exceptional flying under the most difficult circumstances possible. Sarah helped Harrison from the aircraft as medical personnel rushed to assist him. The wounded soldiers were quickly transferred to the hospital, where they would receive the advanced treatment they needed to survive and recover. Standing on the flight line watching the medical team's work, Sarah reflected on how far she had come from the skeptical recruitment office where this journey had begun. She had proven beyond any doubt that her place in the cockpit was earned through skill, determination, and unwavering commitment to the mission. News of Sarah's solo mission spread throughout the base within hours. Word traveled that Lieutenant Martinez had completed one of the most challenging medical evacuations in the theater while flying entirely alone after her aircraft commander became incapacitated. By evening, pilots from other units were seeking her out to hear the details firsthand. The medical evaluation revealed that Major Harrison had suffered from severe heat exhaustion complicated by dehydration, which had caused him to lose consciousness at the most critical moment of the mission. The flight surgeon determined that Harrison would need several days of recovery before returning to flight status and recommended that he avoid operations in extreme heat conditions going forward. Harrison himself was embarrassed by the incident, but overwhelmingly grateful for Sarah's performance. Martinez, he said when she visited him in the medical facility the next day, I've been flying helicopters for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did yesterday. Flying solo into Outpost 7-2 would challenge any pilot, but doing it while managing an unconscious co-pilot and maintaining mission focus? That's extraordinary. Sarah appreciated his words, but what meant more to her was the change in how she was treated throughout the unit. The pilots who had been cautious or skeptical about her abilities now sought her input on challenging missions. The crew chiefs and mechanics, who had been polite but distant, now treated her as a full member of the team. Most importantly, the subtle exclusions and casual dismissals that had characterized her early months in the unit disappeared entirely. Captain Thompson called Sarah into his office 3 days after the mission. Martinez, I've been reviewing the incident reports and debriefing notes from your mission with Major Harrison. I wanted you to know that I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for exceptional performance under emergency conditions. Sarah was stunned. The Distinguished Flying Cross was one of the military's highest awards for aviation excellence, typically reserved for acts of extraordinary heroism or skill. Sir, I was just doing my job. Any qualified pilot would have done the same thing. No, Martinez, that's not accurate, Thompson replied firmly. Not every pilot could have done what you did. The combination of technical skill, decision-making under pressure, and mission focus you demonstrated is rare. You saved the lives of 2 wounded soldiers and possibly prevented the loss of a very expensive aircraft and its crew. Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. When you first arrived at this unit, I'll admit I had concerns. Not about your qualifications, which were clearly excellent, but about how you would perform under the pressures of operational flying. Those concerns were completely unfounded. You've proven yourself to be one of the finest pilots in this battalion. The formal recognition process took several weeks, but the practical impact was immediate. Sarah found herself selected for increasingly complex and important missions. Her fellow pilots began consulting her on technical questions and seeking her advice on challenging flying conditions. The transformation from being tolerated as a diversity requirement to being valued as a skilled professional was complete. Chief Warrant Officer Davis, who had been her initial mentor, stopped by her quarters one evening to talk about her development as a pilot. "Martinez, when we first started flying together, I could see you had strong basic skills, but I wondered how you'd handle the pressures of real-world operations. Yesterday's mission answered that question definitively. You've become the kind of pilot other pilots want to fly with." "Thank you, Chief. Your training and guidance made all the difference in my development." Davis shook his head. "I provided some instruction, but what you demonstrated out there came from your own determination and natural ability. The calm decision-making, the precise flying skills, the ability to manage multiple emergencies simultaneously, those can't be taught. They have to come from within." The recognition extended beyond her immediate unit. Colonel Martinez, the brigade commander, requested a personal briefing on the mission. During their meeting, he expressed interest in Sarah's career development and suggested she consider applying for instructor pilot training after completing her deployment. "Lieutenant Martinez, we need pilots like you training the next generation. Your technical expertise combined with your proven ability to perform under pressure would make you an excellent instructor. Have you given any thought to your long-term career goals?" Sarah had been so focused on proving herself in basic, operational roles that she hadn't seriously considered advancement opportunities. "Sir, I'm interested in any opportunity to continue serving and contribute to the mission. Instructor duty sounds challenging and rewarding." "It is both of those things," the colonel replied. "I'll ensure your name is included in the next selection board for instructor pilot training." Your record speaks for itself. 3 weeks later, the formal ceremony for the Distinguished Flying Cross took place in the base theater, with the entire battalion in attendance. As Sarah stood at attention while the citation was read aloud, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The citation detailed her actions during the mission. For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight as pilot in command, during a critical medical evacuation mission in Afghanistan. When the aircraft commander became incapacitated during approach to a confined landing zone in hostile territory, Lieutenant Martinez assumed sole control of the aircraft and successfully completed the mission, saving the lives of 2 critically wounded soldiers. Her exceptional flying skill, sound judgment, and unwavering commitment to the mission reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Army. After receiving the medal, Sarah was approached by many fellow service members who wanted to congratulate her. Among them was Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had welcomed her to the unit months earlier. "Lieutenant, I knew from the beginning you had the right attitude and determination. What you've accomplished goes beyond just proving yourself. You've raised the bar for everyone in this unit." Perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the 2 soldiers whose lives she had saved. They had recovered sufficiently to attend the ceremony, and both made a point of thanking her personally. "Ma'am," said Sergeant Collins, one of the wounded soldiers, "I want you to know that my wife and kids got to see me come home because of what you did that day. There's no way I can adequately thank you for that." Sarah was deeply moved by their gratitude, but she was equally proud of having proven that her presence in the cockpit was based on merit, not policy requirements. The young woman who had been dismissed as a diversity hire and treated as a token had demonstrated beyond any doubt that she belonged among the military's finest pilots. As the ceremony concluded and the battalion dispersed, Sarah found herself standing alone in the empty theater, still wearing her dress uniform with the new medal prominently displayed. She thought about the recruiting sergeant who had questioned whether she understood the challenges of military aviation, the training instructors who had dismissed her successes as luck, and the fellow pilots who had initially treated her as an unwelcome addition to their ranks. All of those doubts and challenges seemed far away now. Sarah had proven that excellence in aviation had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with skill, preparation, and the courage to perform when lives were on the line. She had earned her place through the same standards applied to every pilot. And she had exceeded those standards when it mattered most, looking out at the empty seats, where her fellow soldiers had sat during the ceremony. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction and purpose. She had achieved her childhood dream of becoming a military pilot. But more importantly, she had opened doors for other qualified women who would follow in her path. They would still face challenges and have to prove themselves. But Sarah's example had demonstrated that success was possible for those willing to work for it. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to serve. Sarah was ready for all of them, knowing that she had earned her place through performance, not politics, and that her wings represented the highest standards of military aviation excellence.